us now invite Dr. Malini, and we have one more presenter, Martin. But first, Dr. Malini to present her topic on women's optimism and psychological and reflective response to a global pandemic. Dr. Malini, kindly let us keep track on the time. And Dr. Malini will be followed by Martin with the last presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the screen sharing? Can you see it?
Yes, Dr. Malini, I can see it. It's not the full screen, but this is fine enough as well.
Get it to the slideshow.
So we have now 17 more minutes.
Okay. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm really glad to be here at this wonderful summit. You know, really all of us in the world, it's hard for people to not be affected by this COVID pandemic. Virtually everyone has been affected in some way. And today I'm going to share with you preliminary results about one area that we should examine, which is the psychological distress and well-being of people as a result of COVID. So the presentation here is women's optimism, psychological and reflective responses to a global pandemic. And here we can consider two questions that we'll ask. How is this COVID pandemic affecting overall mental well-being? And what are women saying about what we are learning and what they are learning from this pandemic? This is a cross-sectional anonymous survey study. As I said, it's preliminary results. And it included about 1,260 participants from representing 63 countries. Today, I'll talk about primarily Spain and Brazil. Most of the participants had at least a bachelor's degree, so it is a fairly educated sample. The woman to the right is 103 years old. 106, and she's holding before you her certificate of release from a hospital where she had been treated for COVID. She survived. And beneath that is a beautiful quote from our beloved Chancellor: "Optimism is the light of God. It's a form of grace that allows you to look at life with greater clarity." This is so true. Optimism literally has an effect on the neuronal activity of the brain. And so it's something that we should definitely learn from. Depression and anxiety are two of the most common mental disorders in the world today. And the average depression global prevalence rate is about 5%, though many studies will show higher rates in different countries. Anxiety global prevalence is somewhere between 3 to 7%. However, now we are looking at, now what is happening is these disorders are rising and have risen much faster than anyone could have imagined since the COVID pandemic has struck. For example, one meta-analysis on COVID-related anxiety and depression found prevalence rates ranging between about 8% to almost 50%. This analysis included several countries: Vietnam, UK, European countries, and so forth, so on and so forth. And to the right, you see the first hint of what we're finding in our study. You're seeing a scatter plot showing a very strong relationship between anxiety scores and depression scores. This means the higher the depression, the more likely you'll also have anxiety. One of the ways that we can try to protect our mental well-being in this and future pandemics is through adopting strong principles and attitudes that research has already demonstrated have a protective factor from psychological disorders, and one of these is optimism. Studies have shown optimism can enhance quality of life. It can literally reduce cardiac mortality. It is inversely related to depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts. It can speed the healing process in people after surgery. Cancer survivors who have optimism versus those who are rather negative in their thinking have longer survival rates. And of course, it helps to manage much stress. Now on the right is another amazing woman. She is 113 years old. And to the right of that is a quote by one of the participants in the study. "With COVID, I learned that nothing can be programmed and that we must live one day at a time and live well with quality." Now, let me share with you some of the results from the study. Here you see 3 countries. I don't know, I hope you don't see this black bar at the top. It's not disappearing for me. Brazil, Spain, and India. The question was to tell us your expectations about the future given the pandemic. And you see that the charts are similar. Most people are coming up in the middle of the chart, which is the bar graph. Most are feeling uncertainty about the future. And this can have an impact on our well-being for sure. And here we're looking at two other questions. On the top, the fear of contracting COVID-19. And on either side of that question, the top area, the two bar graphs, on the left is Spain, on the right is Brazil. Spain was hit very early in the pandemic, and it was hit very hard and heavily. People suffered a lot and they rose from it. So look at this. Most people in Spain who responded to this question are not fearing contracting COVID-19 again. And those on the right in Brazil, where the pandemic has been handled very poorly by the leadership, most of them are moving towards, they're extremely afraid of contracting COVID. Many of them have not even had a first vaccine. Below that, you see the question in the middle: perceived satisfaction with your country's handling of the second wave. On the left, again, Spain, on the right, Brazil. Spain, most women, 56%, and most men say the country did not really do such a good job. However, when we look at Brazil, it's much, much worse. Nearly 90% of the women and nearly 77% of the men are dissatisfied with how Brazil has handled the COVID pandemic. So on the left here in this slide, you see a table that is mostly summarized in the yellow box to the right. It's showing us some ratings about depression, anxiety, and optimism. Under depression, those with no depression or mild are only about 10 or 11%. What does this mean? That means we have nearly 80% from Brazil who endorse symptoms of depression from moderate to severe, nearly 80%. It's a huge prevalence. Anxiety, nearly 72% of them were experiencing anxiety. However, in spite of that, many of them are still holding on to optimism, and we're going to see in a moment the protective effects of that. Below that, you can just see the bar graphs that mimic this, the levels of severity of anxiety and depression. And you can see that as severity increases, so do the numbers of people. So people are suffering there quite a bit. Here is a very important slide. On the left is a modified correlation table. And on the top here, where you see optimism, OPT, this is optimism, you see pink squares. These are negatively correlated with negative experiences. We would expect that. Higher optimism, lower of these themes on the left. So optimism is negatively correlated with anxiety, depression, experiencing more fear since the COVID pandemic, a fear of viral contraction, and also loneliness. At the very bottom, there's a positive correlation, not a very strong one, but a positive one. Optimism is positively correlated with people's compassion for those in other countries suffering from COVID. Now look at the next column, depression. It is positively correlated with anxiety, fear of contraction of the virus, and loneliness. So these negative sentiments, negative factors hold together, and they really have an impact on people. The same with anxiety to the right of that, strongly correlated with feeling more fear since COVID has started, having fear of contracting COVID, and feeling lonely. And at the very bottom, the pink row, those who are feeling compassion for others in other countries, these are positive and negative correlations. Again, that even this compassion for others is negatively correlated with depression, anxiety, fear, loneliness, and so on and so forth. This means that the more optimism, the more compassion, the less these negative experiences have a chance to get a hold of you too tightly. And on the right is just a very brief summary that there are gender differences in depression, anxiety, and optimism, but they are not significant according to this Mann-Whitney test. Briefly, let me share with you the quotes, the voices of some of the women in this study. Here's one quote: "The finitude, which means the finiteness of life, became closer and more evident in the pandemic. And with this, I became more aware of the meaning and reason of things and the importance of conscious choices and presence in everything I do." Other quotes on the left were about nature. What have people here learned? Greater awareness of life and of death and of caring for the planet. To understand the mismanagement we have made of nature and to value small leaves. I think socially it was necessary to reflect on how badly we were doing things. In the middle, the cycles of the world will not change until people change two attitudes towards themselves and all sentient beings and towards the environment. And we can only change ourselves. This is the best contribution that we can make to the world. You see deep reflection from women learning from this pandemic, even from their suffering. And to the right, before I traveled a lot, it was a way to escape from myself. And now I travel inside myself. I was running after nothing. Now I'm calm and everything I need comes to me. I feel more confident about myself because I'm discovering my true potential. Two final quotes. The one on top is someone who continues to struggle a great deal. My mind is more distracted. I have a hard time arranging. I forget things a lot. I refuse to watch the news. I'm not informed about what's happening anywhere in the world. In my day-to-day life, period, I live that way. I can't deal with more suffering. I miss my friends and family very much. Social distancing is doing me a lot of harm. My father died of COVID 3 months ago. It was very hard. Let me just finish this. We were lucky that they let us be with him until his last breath. I'll give just this last quote at the bottom that someone else wrote, that they learned to look more inside of themselves and see the importance of love and compassion. It was a very fast presentation. I thank you for
Thank you very much,
this
Dr.
meeting.
Malini.
Thank you, everyone.